Listen, France. I captured the spy you left behind in my government, the one who reported to DGSE for 12 years. That era of your embedded agent is over. I caught him, and I will never let him go. It was your last mistake. Now get ready for what his interrogation revealed. Let me tell you exactly what he told me about you. My security chief called. Mr. President, we found him. The French operative we've been hunting for 8 months, Moussa Traoré, your protocol officer. He's been in your presidential office for 12 years. 3 different presidents. Everyone trusted him. I felt cold fury. Moussa Traoré, the man who managed my daily schedule, who coordinated my meetings, who knew every appointment, who understood every movement, who had access to every visitor, who saw every document crossing my desk, perfect position for a spy. Where is he now? Secure facility, isolated, waiting for interrogation. I'm interrogating him personally. At 0600, I entered the interrogation room. Moussa sat handcuffed to table, 53 years old, gray hair, tired eyes, 12 years of deception written on his face. He looked up when I entered. No surprise, no fear, just resignation. I sat across from him, said nothing, just watched. Finally, he spoke. Mr. President, I wondered when you would discover me. 12 years is long time to maintain cover. I knew eventually alliance coordination would identify patterns. No denial, no protestation of innocence, just quiet acknowledgement. Why? I asked. Moussa leaned back. Because I believe France is good for Africa. Because I think French guidance prevents chaos. Because I'm convinced African independence is illusion without European partnership. Colonial mentality. Internalized belief in African inferiority. You believe Africans cannot govern themselves? I believe Africans govern better with French support. Look at countries that expelled France completely. Look at instability. Look at poverty. Look at chaos. Classic French propaganda. So you spied for France because you thought you were helping Burkina Faso. I provided intelligence to France because I believed French understanding enables better outcomes. When France knows what's happening, France can respond appropriately. Rationalization, justifying betrayal as service. What intelligence did you provide? Moussa didn't hesitate. Everything, your daily schedule, your meeting participants, your policy discussions, your strategic decisions, your personal conversations. Everything I saw and heard in 12 years. Complete intelligence access, total surveillance of 3 different presidents. You reported on President Sankara? Moussa's eyes flickered. First sign of discomfort. I wasn't working for French intelligence during Sankara's time. I was young, still in university, but my predecessor was. The protocol officer before me. He provided intelligence to France about Sankara, about his plans, about his security, about everything. My blood ran cold. Your predecessor worked for French intelligence? Yes, that's how I was recruited. He identified me during my studies, cultivated relationship, assessed my suitability, recommended me to French intelligence. When he retired, I took his position, continued his work, maintained French intelligence access to presidential office. Generational espionage, French intelligence embedding agents across decades. Did your predecessor provide intelligence that led to Sankara's assassination? Moussa looked away. I don't know specifics, but yes, he provided intelligence about Sankara's security, about his movements, about his vulnerabilities. French intelligence used that information. Historical suspicions confirmed, French involvement proven. How many others? How many other French agents in Burkina Faso government? I don't know all of them. French intelligence compartmentalizes, but I know of 3 others. Defense Ministry official, Foreign Ministry advisor, Central Bank economist, all recruited by same French intelligence officer who recruited me. 4 French agents. Systematic French intelligence network. Who recruited you? Colonel Bertrand Dubois, French military intelligence, based at French embassy, official cover as military attaché, actual role as DGSE recruitment officer. Dubois recruited multiple agents across West Africa, not just Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, Senegal, Ivory Coast. Systematic recruitment operation. Continental espionage operation. What was France's objective? Maintain influence, control African policy, prevent genuine independence, ensure French interests remain protected. France lost colonies formally, but intelligence networks ensure France maintains control informally. Neocolonialism through espionage. Did you ever question this? Moussa was quiet. Sometimes. When I saw President Traoré, you making decisions for Burkina Faso's benefit, when I watched you resist French pressure, when I observed you building alliance. Those moments, I wondered. Psychological control, doubt suppressed through regular handler contact. I leaned forward. Moussa, those doubts were correct. Let me show you evidence that French guidance actually harms Africa. I displayed documents. 2019. You reported my plans to renegotiate mining contracts with French companies. Within week, French ambassador delivered ultimatum, threatened economic retaliation. Your intelligence enabled French pressure. These contracts cost Burkina Faso $340 million annually in lost revenue. Doubt deepening in his eyes. You reported my discussions with Chinese investors. Within days, French intelligence launched media campaign questioning Chinese intentions. Scared away investment that would have created 15,000 jobs. You reported my alliance coordination plans. France immediately pressured other African leaders, attempted to prevent continental unity. You reported my plans to close French military base. France orchestrated political opposition, created instability designed to prevent base closure. Each revelation cracking his ideological commitment. Every report you sent to France was used against Burkina Faso. You didn't help Burkina Faso. You helped France exploit Burkina Faso. Moussa's hands were shaking. 12 years of rationalization crumbling. You can change. You can stop serving France. You can start actually helping Burkina Faso by helping me dismantle French intelligence network, by identifying other agents, by becoming my asset against French espionage. How? I've betrayed my country for 12 years. By helping me dismantle French intelligence network, by identifying other agents, by exposing French operations. You can't undo 12 years of betrayal, but you can prevent future harm. Silence. Moussa processing. If I help you, Dubois will know. French intelligence will know. You'll still be reporting to them, still sending intelligence, still maintaining cover, but intelligence you send will be what I control. You'll become double agent, working for Burkina Faso while France thinks you still work for them. Understanding dawned. You want to use me like you used Diabate? Exactly. You'll continue your reports to Dubois, but every piece of information will be carefully crafted. Every intelligence will advance my goals. What if I refuse? Life imprisonment, treason conviction, maximum sentence, no possibility of parole. But if you help me, I show mercy. Reduced sentence, possibility of eventual freedom. Moussa looked up. I'll do it. I'll work for you. I'll expose French network. Over next 6 weeks, Moussa worked under my control, continued reporting to Dubois, maintained his cover as French agent, but every report was crafted by my intelligence services. We fed France false intelligence through Moussa's controlled communications with systematic precision, made them believe their operations were secure and functioning normally, drew them deeper into trap while they thought they were gathering valuable intelligence. Every report Moussa sent was carefully crafted by my intelligence services with specific strategic objectives. Every piece of information was strategically chosen to serve my goals of network identification. Every communication was designed to maintain Moussa's cover while revealing French intelligence infrastructure. False intelligence about alliance coordination that made DGSE focus resources on non-existent vulnerabilities. Fabricated reports about presidential security that made French intelligence waste time on manufactured threats. Manufactured information about military capabilities that made France miscalculate African strength and continental resolve. Made them believe their operations were secure through consistent reporting patterns and maintained quality. Moussa's reports to Colonel Dubois continued with same frequency as before arrest. Same level of detail as previous 18 months. Same apparent access to classified information. Same valuable intelligence delivery. DGSE had no reason to suspect Moussa was compromised. No indication he'd been arrested. No evidence he was controlled. No suggestion he was turned. Reports maintained previous quality. Communications followed established procedures. Meetings occurred on regular schedule. Everything appeared normal. Everything seemed secure. Everything looked successful. France believed operations were safe. France trusted Moussa's loyalty. France relied on his intelligence. They were completely wrong. Drew them deeper into trap through strategic deception and operational manipulation. Moussa reported, "Alliance planning major military exercise. Details attached. Timing critical." DGSE responded enthusiastically. Increased intelligence requirements. Requested more information. Committed more resources. Actually, exercise was deception, designed to draw French attention, created to waste French resources, used to identify French intelligence priorities, trap working, deception succeeding, France drawn deeper into destruction. Through Moussa's controlled communications, I identified additional French agents beyond those he'd initially revealed. Defense Ministry official he'd mentioned. Foreign Ministry advisor he'd known about. Central bank economist he'd identified. But also others Moussa hadn't known about through his compartmentalized knowledge. DGSE operations officer Moussa had never met. French military intelligence asset Moussa didn't know existed. Economic intelligence specialist Moussa wasn't aware of. Complete network across Burkina Faso government emerging through systematic investigation. Broader penetration than initially suspected. Deeper compromise than first believed. More extensive espionage than originally understood. Defense Ministry official. Colonel Jean-Baptiste Ouedraogo. 20 years government service. 15 years working for DGSE. Recruited during military training in France. Ideological commitment like Moussa. Believed. French guidance helped Africa. Provided intelligence on military capabilities, defense planning, security operations, critical position, devastating access. Enormous damage. $1.2 million in payments over 15 years, $80,000 annually. Systematic betrayal. Continuous espionage. Long-term operation. Foreign Ministry advisor, Dr. Fatou Sow, 18 years government service, 10 years working for DGSE, recruited during diplomatic studies in Paris, similar ideological manipulation. Convinced French partnership benefited Burkina Faso, provided intelligence on diplomatic activities, alliance coordination, international relations, sensitive position, valuable access. Significant damage, $800,000 in payments over 10 years, $80,000 annually. Consistent betrayal, ongoing espionage, decade-long operation. Central bank economist, Dr. Amadou Diallo, 16 years government service, 8 years working for DGSE. Recruited during economics training in Lyon. Same psychological manipulation. Believed French economic guidance necessary, provided intelligence on financial systems, economic policies, monetary decisions, critical position, comprehensive access, substantial damage. $640,000 in payments over 8 years, $80,000 annually. Regular betrayal, continuous espionage, long-term operation. Others Moussa hadn't known about emerged through investigation. Presidential security officer, 5 years DGSE asset, $400,000 received. Military logistics coordinator. 7 years French intelligence, $560,000 received. Government communications specialist, 6 years DGSE operative, $480,000 received. 3 additional agents. Compartmentalized operations, Moussa didn't know them, they didn't know Moussa. DGSE security through compartmentalization, professional tradecraft, systematic operations. Complete network across Burkina Faso government totaling 7 French intelligence assets. Moussa in presidential office, Ouedraogo in defense ministry, Sow in foreign ministry, Diallo in central bank, security officer in presidential protection, logistics coordinator in military, communications specialist in government, 7 agents, 7 critical positions, 7 systematic betrayals, comprehensive penetration, total compromise, complete espionage infrastructure, alliance intelligence coordinated across borders with unprecedented cooperation, Mali using similar techniques with their captured French agent. Malian counterintelligence had arrested French spy in presidential office. Similar position to Moussa, same recruitment method, identical ideological manipulation. Mali turned their agent, controlled his communications, fed false intelligence to DGSE, identified additional French assets, same methodology, same success, same results. Niger turning their spy using coercion and control. Nigerian security had captured DGSE operative in Defense Ministry, threatened life imprisonment, offered reduced sentence for cooperation, agent accepted, became controlled asset, continued reporting to France, sent false intelligence, revealed French network, systematic approach, professional execution, complete success. Chad controlling their asset through legal pressure. Chadian intelligence had detained French agent in foreign ministry, charged with treason, faced execution, agreed to cooperate, became double agent, maintained cover, identified network, enabled arrests, effective methodology, successful operation, total achievement. Pattern emerged across Francophone Africa through intelligence sharing. French intelligence had embedded agents in presidential offices across multiple countries, not isolated operations, systematic campaign. Coordinated strategy, regional espionage infrastructure, generational espionage spanning decades of continuous operations, not recent recruitment, long-term penetration, decades-long intelligence operation maintaining French control over former colonies, not ended by decolonization, continued after independence, preserved through espionage, neo-colonial control, post-colonial dominance, systematic interference. Presidential offices in Burkina Faso, Moussa and predecessor. Mali, similar agent and predecessor. Niger, comparable operative and previous asset. Chad, equivalent spy and former agent. Senegal, presidential office penetration. Ivory Coast, similar compromise. Cameroon, equivalent penetration. Gabon, comparable operation. 8 presidential offices. 8 French agents. 8 systematic betrayals. Generational espionage. Decades of operations, continuous control. Defense ministries across region. Burkina Faso Defense Ministry. Mali Military Intelligence. Niger Defense Planning. Chad Military Operations. Senegal Armed Forces. Ivory Coast Defense Coordination. Multiple defense ministries. Multiple French agents. Multiple systematic compromises. Military intelligence. Defense espionage. Security betrayal. Foreign ministries throughout Francophone Africa. Burkina Faso Foreign Ministry. Mali Diplomatic Service. Niger International Relations. Chad Foreign Affairs. Senegal Diplomatic Operations. Ivory Coast Foreign Service. Multiple foreign ministries. Multiple DGSE assets. Multiple diplomatic compromises. Foreign intelligence. Diplomatic espionage. International betrayal. Economic institutions across region. Burkina Faso Central Bank. Mali Finance Ministry. Niger Economic Planning. Chad Monetary Authority. Senegal Financial Institutions. Ivory Coast Economic Ministry. Multiple economic positions. Multiple French agents. Multiple financial compromises. Economic intelligence. Financial espionage. Monetary betrayal. Decades-long intelligence operation maintaining French control through systematic espionage. Not temporary operations. Permanent infrastructure. Not isolated agents. Generational networks. Not recent recruitment. Decades-long penetration. French intelligence maintaining control over former colonies decades after formal decolonization. Control through espionage. Dominance through intelligence. Influence through betrayal. Neo-colonialism. Post-colonial control. Systematic interference. 10 weeks after Moussa's arrest, I executed coordinated operation across Francophone Africa. Simultaneous raids across 6 African nations at precisely 0500 hours. Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, Chad, Senegal, Ivory Coast, all moving simultaneously, all arresting targets, all executing coordinated plan, perfect timing, perfect coordination, perfect execution, alliance cooperation, continental security, collective action. Burkina Faso arrested all identified French agents in coordinated dawn raids. Defense Ministry official Colonel Ouedraogo arrested at his residence. Foreign Ministry advisor Dr. Sow arrested at her home. Central Bank economist Dr. Diallo arrested at his house. 3 others Moussa helped identify arrested at their locations. Presidential Security Officer, Military Logistics Coordinator, Government Communications Specialist. All arrested, all detained, all isolated, 7 agents, 7 arrests, 7 betrayals exposed, complete network destruction. Mali arrested their French intelligence network in synchronized operations. Presidential office agent arrested during morning commute. Military intelligence officer arrested at headquarters. Economic advisor arrested at ministry. 3 agents, 3 positions, 3 betrayals. Malian security forces executing professionally. Alliance coordination working perfectly. Continental cooperation succeeding completely. Niger detained their French operatives in coordinated raids. Government officials arrested at offices. Military personnel arrested at bases. Economic specialists arrested at ministries. Multiple agents, multiple positions, multiple compromises. Nigerian counterintelligence operating effectively. Alliance intelligence functioning successfully. Continental security achieving completely. Chad captured their French agents in simultaneous operations. Similar positions to other countries. Presidential office, defense ministry, foreign affairs, same recruitment patterns across nations. Ideological manipulation, long-term cultivation, systematic approach. Chadian security services executing perfectly. Alliance cooperation working flawlessly. Continental coordination succeeding absolutely. Senegal arrested French intelligence network in coordinated dawn operations. Presidential office penetration eliminated. Defense ministry compromise ended. Foreign affairs betrayal stopped. Multiple agents. Multiple arrests. Multiple exposures. Senegalese counterintelligence performing excellently. Alliance intelligence coordinating successfully. Continental security functioning perfectly. Ivory Coast detained French operatives in synchronized raids. Government penetration discovered, military compromise exposed, economic intelligence revealed, multiple agents, multiple positions, multiple betrayals, Ivorian security forces executing professionally, alliance cooperation achieving completely, continental coordination succeeding totally, all arrested simultaneously at exactly 0500 hours across 6 nations, perfect coordination across multiple countries, perfect timing across different time zones, perfect execution across various security services, alliance intelligence coordination working flawlessly, continental counterintelligence operating perfectly, collective security functioning ideally, over 40 agents arrested, dozens of handlers identified, complete network exposed, total infrastructure destroyed, absolute capability eliminated. And I arrested Colonel Bertrand Dubois personally, French military attaché at Israeli embassy in Ouagadougou, DGSE recruitment officer for West Africa, handler of dozens of agents across multiple countries, coordinator of French intelligence operations throughout region, arrested at controlled meeting with Moussa, caught receiving false intelligence we'd crafted, filmed conducting espionage operations, recorded directing intelligence activities, complete evidence, perfect documentation, absolute proof. Arrest operation was surgical. Moussa arranged meeting with Dubois. Restaurant in Ouagadougou, 0500 hours. Moussa arrived first. Dubois arrived second. Meeting began. Moussa passed documents, false intelligence, crafted reports, strategic deception. Dubois reviewed documents, discussed operational matters, provided new taskings, all filmed, all recorded, all documented. Then I gave signal. Security forces moved. Surrounded restaurant, blocked exits, arrested Dubois, seized documents, confiscated devices, perfect operation. Dubois tried to invoke diplomatic immunity. I am French military attaché. I have diplomatic status. You cannot arrest me. I responded directly. You are DGSE recruitment officer. You conducted espionage operations. You recruited African citizens. You directed intelligence activities. Diplomatic immunity doesn't cover espionage. Vienna Convention doesn't protect spy operations. You're under arrest. Diplomatic immunity revoked. Espionage proven. Arrest legal. Dubois detained. Immunity denied. Protection eliminated. I held press conference at 0900 hours with major announcement. Today, Burkina Faso and alliance partners dismantled French intelligence network operating across Francophone Africa. Over 40 agents arrested in 6 countries. Multiple DGSE handlers detained, including Colonel Dubois. Decades of espionage operations exposed completely. Generational French intelligence interference in African sovereignty revealed totally. I displayed the evidence on multiple screens. Recruitment documentation showing DGSE approaches. payment records proving French funding, communication intercepts revealing operational coordination, organizational charts showing network structure, everything visible, everything public, everything exposed. Moussa Traoré, my protocol officer for 12 years, was French intelligence agent recruited during university studies, ideologically committed to French influence, believing French guidance benefited Africa, reporting everything he saw and heard for over a decade, providing France real-time intelligence about 3 different Burkina Faso presidents, compromising national security, endangering sovereignty, facilitating French manipulation. I showed Moussa's complete history, recruited 2011 during university, cultivated by French intelligence officer, assessed for ideological susceptibility, targeted for psychological manipulation, convinced that serving France served Africa, recruited without payment initially, motivated by belief, not money. Later received modest compensation, $2,000 monthly. Not primary motivation, ideology was primary, money was secondary, 12 years of service, 12 years of betrayal, 12 years of espionage. Moussa wasn't isolated case. French intelligence embedded similar agents across Francophone Africa using identical methodology, presidential offices in multiple countries, defense ministries throughout region, foreign ministries across Francophone Africa, economic institutions in multiple nations, generational espionage maintaining French control decades after formal decolonization in 1,960 seconds. I displayed network map, 6 countries highlighted, over 40 agents marked, presidential offices, defense ministries, foreign ministries, economic institutions, complete penetration, systematic espionage, generational operations, everything exposed, everything public, everything destroyed. After arrest, Moussa agreed to work for me under threat of life imprisonment, became my double agent through psychological breaking, helped identify French network through continued reporting, enabled coordinated takedown through controlled communications. His service to Burkina Faso helped dismantle French intelligence infrastructure he'd helped maintain for 12 years. I explained the psychological breaking process. Moussa believed he was helping Africa by serving France. I showed him evidence that French intelligence used his reports to harm Burkina Faso, showed him how France pressured us using his intelligence, showed him how France blocked our development using his information, showed him how France maintained exploitation using his reports. Evidence broke his ideological commitment. Truth destroyed his rationalization. Reality shattered his beliefs. He understood he'd been manipulated, understood he'd harmed his country, understood he'd served French interests against African interests. Psychological control broken, ideological commitment destroyed, French loyalty eliminated. I also discovered something historical that changes our understanding of past events. Moussa's predecessor, the protocol officer before him serving from 1980 to 2011, was also French intelligence agent recruited and controlled by DGSE. He provided intelligence to France about President Thomas Sankara from 1983 to 1987, about his revolutionary policies, about his anti-French positions, about his security arrangements, about his movements, about his vulnerabilities. French intelligence used that information for operations against Sankara. President Sankara was assassinated in 1987 inches coup that brought Blaise Compaoré to power. French intelligence agent in Sankara's own office provided intelligence that may have facilitated his assassination. Historical suspicions about French involvement now confirmed through intelligence documents we seized from Moussa and his predecessors' files. Historical revelation was explosive. Sankara's assassination had been suspected of French involvement for decades, circumstantial evidence, suspicious timing, French beneficiaries, but no proof. No documentation, no confirmation, until now, until Moussa's interrogation, until predecessors' files, until seized documents, proof obtained, documentation secured. Confirmation achieved. French intelligence agent in Sankara's office, reporting to DGSE, providing intelligence used against Sankara, facilitating assassination, historical crime, French guilt. Documented proof. French government response was immediate within 1 hour. Predictable denial as expected. Standard response to espionage exposure. Official statement. France categorically denies operating spy network in Africa. Arrested individuals are not French intelligence officers. Claims of DGSE operations are fabricated. Evidence is manufactured. We respect African sovereignty completely. These accusations regarding President Sankara are especially offensive and completely false. Standard denial, expected response, prepared lie. I responded within 30 minutes with overwhelming evidence that destroyed their denial completely and exposed their lies totally. France denies spy network. But I have recruitment documentation from Colonel Bertrand Dubois showing systematic DGSE approach to multiple agents. Communication intercepts showing DGSE coordination with operatives. Operational reports from agents to DGSE headquarters. Payment records proving French intelligence funding. Organizational documents showing network structure. Personnel files identifying all agents. Everything. Complete documentation, comprehensive proof, undeniable evidence. I released recruitment documentation publicly. Colonel Dubois' systematic approach to recruiting African officials. Identification of candidates during studies in France. Cultivation through French cultural programs. Assessment of ideological susceptibility. Psychological manipulation emphasizing French-African partnership. Recruitment pitch framing espionage as helping Africa. Everything documented in DGSE files we seized. Everything showing systematic recruitment operation. Everything proving coordinated intelligence campaign. I released communication intercepts publicly. Encrypted messages between Moussa and Dubois. Between Ouedraogo and his handler. Between Sao and her case officer. Between Diallo and his controller. Hundreds of communications. Thousands of messages. Everything intercepted through Alliance Signals Intelligence. Everything decrypted through Continental Cryptanalysis. Everything proving continuous espionage operations. Everything showing systematic intelligence activities. Everything demonstrating coordinated betrayal. I released operational reports publicly. Intelligence reports from agents to DGSE headquarters. Moussa's reports about presidential activities. Ouedraogo's reports about military capabilities. Sao's reports about diplomatic operations. Diallo's reports about economic policies. Hundreds of reports. Comprehensive intelligence. Systematic espionage. Everything showing what French intelligence gathered. Everything proving what agents provided. Everything demonstrating what France knew about African governments. I released payment records publicly. Financial transfers from DGSE accounts to agents. Shell company transactions laundering money. Bank deposits to agent accounts. Moussa, $288,000 over 12 years. Ouedraogo, $1.2 million over 15 years. Sao, $800,000 over 10 years. Diallo, $640,000 over 8 years. Others, various amounts. Total, over $4 million. Decades of payments, systematic funding, comprehensive financial support. Everything traced, everything documented. Everything proving French intelligence. Investment in African espionage. I released organizational documents publicly. DGSE Africa Division structure. Personnel assignments. Operational territories. Agent networks. Command hierarchies. Everything showing how French intelligence organized African operations. Everything proving systematic espionage infrastructure. Everything demonstrating coordinated continental campaign. I released personnel files publicly. All 40-plus arrested agents, complete biographical information, recruitment details, operational histories, intelligence provided, payments received. Everything documenting decades of French espionage, everything showing generational intelligence operations, everything proving systematic French control through intelligence networks. I released historical documents about Sankara, Moussa's predecessor's intelligence reports from 1983 to 1987, reports about Sankara's policies, reports about his anti-French positions, reports about his security, reports about his movements, reports about his vulnerabilities, everything showing French intelligence gathering on Sankara, everything proving systematic surveillance, everything suggesting intelligence used for assassination planning, historical documents, damning evidence, confirmed suspicions. French denial collapsed within 48 hours under evidence weight. Too much documentation released, too many files exposed, too clear connections proven, too obvious coordination demonstrated, too comprehensive proof provided, denial impossible, lies transparent, deception obvious, French government forced to revise statement under international pressure and media scrutiny. Revised statement issued at 1,400 hours 2 days later. France acknowledges that individuals with past intelligence connections may have had unauthorized contact with African officials during various periods. However, these contacts were not approved French government operations conducted with official authorization. These activities were not sanctioned by proper authorities following correct procedures. We categorically deny any involvement in President Sankara's assassination. We are investigating how these unauthorized contacts occurred without proper oversight. We are reviewing our procedures to prevent future unauthorized activities. From categorically denies spy network to acknowledges individuals with intelligence connections in 48 hours. From fabricated evidence to investigating unauthorized contacts in 2 days. From completely false regarding Sankara to categorically deny with weaker language. From absolute denial to qualified admission. From complete rejection to partial acknowledgement. Collapse, retreat, admission. Forced by evidence, compelled by proof, required by documentation. Continental response was immediate and coordinated across Francophone Africa. Multiple African nations launched investigations within hours of my press conference. Mali announced formal investigation within 2 hours. Niger initiated comprehensive review within 3 hours. Chad began systematic examination within 4 hours. Senegal launched official investigation within 5 hours. Ivory Coast started formal review within 6 hours. Cameroon initiated investigation within 8 hours. Gabon began examination within 10 hours. 8 nations, 8 investigations. Continental response. Coordinated action, unified reaction. Within 4 months, French intelligence operations in Africa were devastated beyond recovery. Over 60 agents arrested across 8 countries, dozens of handlers expelled from African nations, hundreds of operations compromised through exposure, thousands of documents seized providing evidence, decades of network building destroyed in months, generations of recruitment eliminated in weeks, complete intelligence capability terminated permanently, total espionage infrastructure demolished absolutely, absolute operational capacity destroyed completely, specific arrests totaling over 60, Burkina Faso arrested 7 agents, Mali arrested 8 agents, Niger arrested 6 agents, Chad arrested 7 agents, Senegal arrested 9 agents, Ivory Coast arrested 11 agents, Cameroon arrested 7 agents, Gabon arrested 5 agents, total 60 agents, 8 countries, continental operation, coordinated success, perfect execution. Dozens of handlers expelled, totaling 37, French embassy personnel in 8 countries declared persona non grata, diplomatic immunity revoked, expelled within 48 hours. Burkina Faso expelled 5, including Du Bois. Mali expelled 4, Niger expelled 3, Chad expelled 5, Senegal expelled 6, Ivory Coast expelled 7, Cameroon expelled 4, Gabon expelled 3. Total, 37 French diplomats expelled. 8 countries. Continental response, unified action. I addressed the nation in televised speech broadcast across Burkina Faso and alliance members. 4 months ago, I arrested Moussa Traoré, French intelligence agent embedded in presidential office for 12 years, 3 presidents compromised, decades of espionage, generational betrayal. I didn't just arrest him and imprison him in standard procedure. I broke him psychologically, turned him into my weapon, used him to destroy French intelligence network across Africa that he'd helped maintain. But I also discovered something historical that changes our understanding of our past and President Sankara's death. Moussa's predecessor, who served from 1980 to 2011, was also French intelligence agent recruited and controlled by DGSE throughout his service. He provided intelligence about President Sankara from 1983 until Sankara's assassination in 1987, about his revolutionary policies threatening French interests, about his anti-French positions challenging French dominance, about his security arrangements, about his movements, about his vulnerabilities. French intelligence used that information. President Sankara was assassinated the 15th of October 1987. French intelligence agent in his own office provided intelligence that may have facilitated his death. That likely enabled his assassination. That probably contributed to his murder. This is France's true relationship with Africa revealed through evidence. Not partnership as they claim, espionage as we've proven, not cooperation as they proclaim. Manipulation as we've documented, not respect as they assert, control as we've exposed, Not friendship as they pretend, assassination as we've discovered. France's relationship with Africa is espionage, manipulation, control, assassination, all proven, all documented, all exposed. I am Ibrahim Traoré, France embedded agent in my office for 12 years. I caught him through investigation. France controlled him through psychological manipulation. I turned him through evidence and pressure. France built African network over decades. I destroyed it in 4 months through coordination. I don't tolerate French espionage in my government. Don't allow neo-colonial intelligence in my administration. Don't ignore historical crimes against our leaders. I catch agents through counterintelligence, break psychological control through evidence, dismantle networks through coordination, expose assassinations through investigation. Moussa betrayed Burkina Faso for 12 years, providing intelligence to foreign powers who sought to maintain their grip on African sovereignty. But his final service helped protect Africa through cooperation with our counterintelligence operations that turned him into an asset for continental security. His cooperation exposed French operations across the entire region through revelation of methods, contacts, and strategic objectives that had remained hidden for decades. His assistance destroyed the DGSE network through identification of every operative, every safe house, every communication channel, and every local collaborator who had been working to undermine African independence. His intelligence eliminated French capability through disclosure of operational procedures, encryption methods, financial channels, and the entire architecture of neo-colonial espionage that had been built systematically since the nominal end of direct colonial rule. I caught him through alliance coordination with sister agencies across West Africa who had been tracking anomalies in diplomatic communications and unexplained financial flows that pointed to a sophisticated intelligence operation. I will never let him go despite his cooperation because he represents too valuable an asset and too dangerous a liability to ever be released back into the world where he might be reactivated or eliminated by his former handlers. Your last mistake was embedding him so deeply in our governmental structures that you believed he was untouchable and beyond suspicion. My permanent victory came from turning him completely, breaking his psychological conditioning, and transforming him from your most valuable asset into your greatest vulnerability. Your failed operation maintaining the network collapsed when we identified the communication patterns and began systematic surveillance of every contact. My successful operation destroying the infrastructure proceeded methodically, dismantling each component while preventing your intelligence services from understanding the scope of the compromise. Your wasted investment funding, decades of espionage operations, training operatives, establishing cover identities, and building networks of influence has been completely neutralized. My effective use of this controlled asset has provided intelligence that reaches far beyond Burkina Faso, exposing operations in Mali, Niger, Chad, Senegal, Côte d'Ivoire, and throughout the Sahel region where French intelligence believed it operated with impunity. The French spy was captured through meticulous investigation that began with financial irregularities noticed by our reformed banking oversight committees. The network was dismantled through coordination among African intelligence services who had independently identified suspicious activities that, when compared and analyzed collectively, revealed the full scope of the espionage infrastructure. Historical truth was revealed through evidence that Moussa provided, including communications, financial records, operational directives, and personal testimony that connected decades of destabilization efforts to specific offices within French intelligence headquarters. Sankara's assassination has been connected to French intelligence through documentary evidence that Moussa had maintained as insurance, evidence that proves beyond any reasonable doubt that the murder of Africa's most visionary leader was not merely tolerated but actively facilitated by foreign powers who feared his example would spread across the continent. Generational espionage has been exposed completely, revealing how intelligence operations were passed from colonial administrators to post-independence handlers, maintaining continuity of control even as the formal structures of empire were dismantled. Neo-colonial control has been eliminated permanently through the systematic identification and neutralization of every mechanism through which foreign powers exercised invisible influence over our political processes, our economic decisions, and our security apparatus. Mission complete with total success beyond what we initially projected when this operation began 3 years ago with the first suspicious indicators. Network destroyed with complete elimination of operational capability, leaving French intelligence blind in a region where they had maintained comprehensive coverage for over 6 decades. Historical crime exposed with documented proof that will stand up to any international legal scrutiny and cannot be dismissed as conspiracy theory or anti-Western propaganda. Sovereignty protected with absolute security measures that have been implemented to prevent any reconstitution of foreign intelligence networks. Independence defended with permanent vigilance through reformed security services that have been purged of foreign influence and rebuilt with loyalty to African interests as the foundational principle. Africa secured with continental unity as intelligence services across the region now share information and coordinate operations against common threats to our collective sovereignty. Justice achieved for Sankara and the thousands of other African leaders, activists, intellectuals, and ordinary citizens who were murdered, imprisoned, or silenced because they dared to imagine genuine independence. Truth revealed for history so that future generations will understand the true nature of the struggle for African sovereignty and the sophisticated mechanisms through which neo-colonialism operated. Victory won for sovereignty that establishes a new foundation for African self-determination free from invisible foreign control. Musa sat across from me in the interrogation room for 17 consecutive days before he finally broke. Before the weight of evidence and the certainty of his situation penetrated the layers of training and psychological conditioning that French intelligence had built into him over more than a decade of handler relationships. He had been recruited during his time as a junior officer in our military intelligence service. Approached carefully by a French military attaché who identified his ambition, his resentment at being passed over for promotion, and his fundamental insecurity about his place in the post-revolutionary order. They cultivated him slowly, never rushing, building trust through small favors and shared confidences before ever asking him to provide classified information. By the time he was actually spying, he had been psychologically prepared to see it not as betrayal, but as sophisticated pragmatism, as understanding the real nature of international relations, as positioning himself on the winning side of history. The recruitment followed a pattern that French intelligence has refined over decades of operation in former colonies, a pattern that Musa's debriefing has now exposed in comprehensive detail. They identify candidates early, often during educational exchanges in France or through military cooperation programs where promising African officers receive training at French institutions. They assess psychological vulnerabilities, political orientations, financial pressures, and personal ambitions. They create opportunities for informal contact, building relationships that seem personal rather than professional, that feel like genuine friendship rather than intelligence cultivation. They provide small benefits that create a sense of obligation, gifts that seem insignificant but that establish a pattern of receiving value from the relationship. They share information that makes the candidate feel like an insider, like someone who understands the sophisticated reality of international affairs rather than the naive nationalism of post-colonial rhetoric. They normalize the idea of cooperation with French interests, framing it as enlightened self-interest rather than betrayal, as understanding that African development requires European partnership rather than confrontation. Only after months or even years of this preparation do they make the first actual request for classified information, and even then they frame it as something innocent, as sharing information that France already knows through other channels, as helping to prevent misunderstandings that might damage the bilateral relationship. They pay well but not extravagantly, enough to provide financial comfort but not so much that it feels like being bought. They provide recognition and respect that the asset may not receive from his own superiors, creating emotional bonds that reinforce the practical benefits of cooperation. They establish communication protocols that feel sophisticated and professional, that make the asset feel like a real intelligence operative rather than a traitor, that provide the psychological satisfaction of being part of something larger and more important than his official duties. Musa described all of this in exhaustive detail once he accepted that his situation was hopeless, once he understood that we had evidence that would convict him regardless of whether he cooperated, once he calculated that his only chance of avoiding execution was to provide value that exceeded the harm he had caused. He explained how his handler, a DGSE officer operating under diplomatic cover as a cultural attaché, had guided him through the process of photographing documents, of memorizing information that could not be physically removed, of identifying other potential recruits within the security services. He described the dead drops in Ouagadougou where he would leave film canisters or USB drives, the communication protocols using seemingly innocent emails about cultural events that contained coded messages, the emergency procedures if he believed he was under surveillance. Most valuable were his descriptions of the broader network, the other assets that French intelligence had recruited across our government and throughout the region. He identified military officers who reported on troop movements and operational planning, civil servants who provided advance notice of policy decisions, business leaders who facilitated economic intelligence collection, journalists who shaped public opinion in directions favorable to French interests, and politicians who received funding through circuitous channels in exchange for supporting positions aligned with French policy preferences. The network was comprehensive, redundant, and sophisticated, built over decades with the patience and resources of a major intelligence service that viewed Africa as critical to French global standing and economic interests. The evidence he provided included not just names and operational details, but also the strategic objectives that guided French intelligence operations in Burkina Faso and across the Sahel. We learned that France viewed the region as critical to its nuclear energy program because of uranium deposits in Niger, as essential to its counterterrorism narrative that justified continued military presence, as a testing ground for intelligence methods and technologies that could be applied elsewhere, and as a zone where French influence had to be maintained to prevent other powers from establishing their own spheres of control. The intelligence operations served multiple purposes simultaneously, collecting information about African government intentions and capabilities, identifying and neutralizing potential threats to French interests, maintaining networks of influence that could shape policy decisions, and demonstrating to other African nations the futility of genuine independence. Sankara's assassination emerged as a central case study in how these operations functioned at their most extreme. Moussa provided documents that showed French intelligence had advanced knowledge of the coup plot against Sankara, that they had assessed his removal as beneficial to French interests, that they had provided intelligence support to the plotters, and that they had ensured international acceptance of the new regime through diplomatic channels. The evidence confirmed what many had long suspected but could never prove, that Sankara's murder was not simply tolerated by France, but was facilitated as part of a broader strategy to prevent the emergence of genuinely independent African leadership that might inspire similar movements elsewhere on the continent. The documents revealed the reasoning behind French support for the coup in chilling bureaucratic language that treated the death of one of Africa's greatest leaders as a routine matter of strategic interest management. Intelligence assessments described Sankara as a threat to French economic interests because of his rejection of structural adjustment programs and his advocacy for African economic independence. They noted his dangerous example in refusing to pay odious debts inherited from the colonial period, his radical land reform that threatened to inspire similar movements elsewhere, his empowerment of women and peasants that disrupted traditional power structures through which France exercised influence, and his Pan-African vision that could unite African nations against neo-colonial exploitation. The conclusion was clear: Sankara had to be removed, and the operation had to be executed in a way that would discourage others from following his path. This revelation has profound implications not just for historical understanding but for current African politics and international relations. It demonstrates that the greatest threats to African sovereignty have often come not from overt military intervention but from invisible intelligence operations that manipulate internal political processes. It shows that the violence and instability that have plagued post-colonial Africa cannot be understood simply as the result of internal failures or ethnic conflicts, but must be analyzed in the context of deliberate external intervention designed to prevent genuine independence. It proves that the conspiracy theories that Western academics and media have long dismissed as paranoid nationalism were actually accurate descriptions of real operations conducted systematically over decades. The exposure of this network has already begun to transform African politics in ways that extend far beyond Burkina Faso. Intelligence services across the continent have launched their own investigations, identifying and neutralizing assets that were part of the same broader French intelligence infrastructure. Political leaders who were previously untouchable because of their connections to foreign powers have been exposed and removed from positions of influence. Economic relationships that seemed like normal business arrangements have been revealed as mechanisms for intelligence collection and influence operations. Media outlets that presented themselves as independent voices have been shown to receive funding through channels connected to foreign intelligence services. The entire architecture of neo-colonial control is being systematically dismantled as the full scope of the operations becomes clear. The French government has naturally denied everything. dismissing our evidence as fabrications designed to justify authoritarian crackdowns and to scapegoat France for Africa's problems. Their media has characterized our revelations as conspiracy theories promoted by military regimes seeking to distract from their own failures. Their diplomats have warned of consequences if we continue to make what they call baseless accusations against French institutions. Their intelligence services have attempted to discredit Moussa, suggesting he is providing false information under duress, or that he is a double agent working for other foreign powers. But the evidence is too comprehensive, too detailed, and too well documented to be dismissed. We have communications intercepts, financial records, operational directives, and corroborating testimony from multiple sources. We have shown selected evidence to journalists, academics, and international legal experts who have confirmed its authenticity and significance. More importantly, we have coordinated our revelations with other African nations who have their own evidence of French intelligence operations, creating a collective case that is far more powerful than any single nation could present alone. The coordination itself represents a historic achievement in African intelligence cooperation, breaking through decades of mutual suspicion and competitive relationships that French intelligence had deliberately cultivated to prevent exactly this kind of unified response. We established secure communication channels through trusted intermediaries, shared methodologies for document authentication and source verification, cross-referenced operational details to identify patterns and connections that no single service could have detected, and synchronized our public revelations to maximize impact while minimizing opportunities for French intelligence to contain the damage through bilateral pressure or media manipulation. Mali has provided evidence of French support for separatist movements in the north that serve to justify continued military presence under the guise of counter-terrorism operations and regional stabilization. The Malian intelligence service documented how French operatives maintained contact with Tuareg separatist leaders, even while French military forces were ostensibly fighting against armed groups in the region, how weapons and intelligence were selectively provided to factions that would ensure continued instability without achieving outright victory, and how French intelligence officers actively discouraged negotiated settlements that might have resolved the conflict and eliminated the justification for permanent French military bases. The evidence includes intercepted communications between DGSE officers and separatist commanders, financial records showing payments routed through front companies and non-governmental organizations, and testimony from former separatist fighters who were recruited and trained by French intelligence to conduct operations that would maintain a level of insecurity sufficient to justify French military presence but not so severe as to completely destabilize the Malian state. The Malian documentation reveals a sophisticated strategy of controlled chaos, where French intelligence worked to maintain a permanent low-intensity conflict that served multiple strategic objectives simultaneously. The instability justified French military bases and operations across the Sahel, providing strategic depth and operational flexibility for French forces in a region that Paris considered critical to its global power projection capabilities. The counter-terrorism narrative provided political cover in international forums, allowing France to present its military presence as humanitarian intervention rather than neo-colonial occupation. The fractured security environment made Mali dependent on French military support, giving Paris leverage over Malian political decisions and policy choices. The ongoing conflict prevented Mali from fully exploiting its natural resources or developing alternative international partnerships, maintaining French economic advantages and preventing competitors from establishing their own presence in the region. Most damningly, the Malian evidence shows how French intelligence actively sabotaged peace negotiations and reconciliation efforts that threatened to resolve the northern conflict. DGSE officers provided intelligence to separatist groups about government troop movements and negotiating positions, undermining Malian military operations and diplomatic initiatives. French diplomats used their influence in international organizations to impose conditions on peace agreements that they knew would be unacceptable to one side or the other, ensuring that negotiations would fail while France could publicly maintain its commitment to peaceful resolution. French media outlets amplified narratives that portrayed the conflict as intractable ethnic warfare rather than as a political dispute that could be resolved through negotiation, shaping international perceptions in ways that normalized permanent French military presence as the only realistic option for managing the situation. Niger has documented French manipulation of uranium contracts and political processes that ensured French nuclear energy companies maintained access to Nigerian uranium at prices far below market rates, while French intelligence operations prevented Niger from developing alternative export relationships or renegotiating contracts on more favorable terms. The evidence includes internal French government documents showing coordination between the Ministry of Defense, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, French intelligence services, and the state-owned nuclear company Areva to maintain what French officials privately described as strategic control over Nigerian uranium resources essential to France's energy independence and nuclear weapons program. The documents reveal how French intelligence identified and neutralized Nigerian politicians and civil society activists who advocated for contract renegotiation, how French diplomats threatened aid cuts and security cooperation withdrawals when Nigerian governments explored alternative partnerships with Chinese or Russian companies, and how French media and academic institutions produced research and commentary that justified existing contractual arrangements as mutually beneficial, even as the evidence showed massive resource extraction with minimal benefit to Niger. The Nigerian intelligence service has provided detailed evidence of how French operations targeted specific individuals who threatened French uranium interests. Political leaders who campaigned on platforms of resource nationalism found themselves facing corruption investigations based on intelligence provided by French sources, investigations that may or may not have had factual basis, but that effectively destroyed political careers and discouraged others from taking similar positions. Labor union leaders who organized strikes at uranium mining facilities were identified to Nigerian security services as having connections to terrorist organizations, leading to arrests and imprisonment that broke the labor movement's capacity to demand better wages and working conditions. Journalists who investigated the environmental and health impacts of uranium mining received threatening messages and experienced suspicious accidents that French intelligence officers privately acknowledged were part of operations to discourage critical coverage. Civil society organizations that advocated for transparency in extractive industries found their funding sources mysteriously withdrawn and their leaders subjected to tax audits and legal harassment that French diplomatic cables reveal were orchestrated through pressure on the Nigerian government. The financial documentation from Niger shows the true scale of resource extraction and the mechanisms through which French companies maintained advantageous terms. Uranium was purchased at prices that were sometimes less than half of prevailing market rates, with contract terms that had been negotiated during the immediate post-independence period when Niger had minimal technical capacity to assess fair value and when French political influence over Nigerian leadership was at its peak. These contracts included clauses that made renegotiation extremely difficult, with dispute resolution mechanisms that heavily favored the French companies and with termination penalties that would have bankrupted the Nigerian government. French intelligence operations ensured that Nigerian officials who understood these disadvantageous terms and who had the technical knowledge to negotiate improvements were either co-opted through financial incentives or removed from positions where they could influence policy. The result was a system that extracted billions of dollars of value from Niger while leaving the country among the poorest in the world, with minimal infrastructure development, persistent food insecurity, and inadequate public services, despite sitting on resources that powered French cities and French nuclear weapons. Chad has exposed French involvement in recurring coup attempts and political assassinations that targeted leaders who sought to reduce French military presence or to diversify Chad's international partnerships beyond exclusive reliance on Paris. The Chadian intelligence service has documented at least 7 coup attempts over the past 3 decades in which French intelligence provided advanced knowledge to Chadian authorities about some plots while actively supporting others, using the threat of instability to maintain leverage over Chadian leadership and to ensure continued access to Chadian territory for French military bases that served as staging grounds for operations across Central Africa. The evidence includes testimony from former coup plotters who were recruited and funded by DGSE officers, communications intercepts showing French intelligence coordination with military officers planning regime change, and financial records tracing payments from French government accounts through intermediaries to Chadian opposition figures and military commanders. The pattern revealed in the Chadian documentation shows how French intelligence used the threat of coups as a tool of political control, supporting plots against leaders who moved too far from French policy preferences while protecting compliant leaders from genuine internal threats. When Chadian presidents maintained close alignment with French interests, French intelligence provided comprehensive support for regime security, identifying potential coup plotters, monitoring opposition movements, and even conducting operations to eliminate serious threats to regime stability. But when Chadian leaders began to assert greater independence, seeking closer ties with Libya or Sudan or exploring economic partnerships with China, French intelligence shifted from regime protection to regime change operations, identifying disgruntled military officers, providing financial support and operational planning for coup attempts, and offering assurances of French recognition and support if the coups succeeded. The assassination evidence is particularly significant because it includes cases where French intelligence not only had advanced knowledge of planned killings but actively facilitated them through provision of intelligence, weapons, and operational support. Opposition leaders who might have provided genuine democratic alternatives to authoritarian rule were eliminated when they appeared likely to win elections and to pursue policies contrary to French interests. Military reformers who sought to professionalize Chadian armed forces and reduce dependence on French military advisors were killed in incidents that were publicly attributed to accidents or common crime, but that French intelligence documents reveal were targeted assassinations. Journalists and intellectuals who documented French exploitation of Chadian resources or who advocated for Pan-African solidarity rather than exclusive Francophone alignment were murdered by operatives with connections to French intelligence services that the Chadian evidence has now definitively established. Senegal has revealed French intelligence operations targeting Pan-African organizations and leaders who advocated for reduced French influence across the continent, demonstrating that French intelligence viewed Pan-Africanism itself as a threat to be contained rather than as a legitimate political movement to be respected. The Senegalese intelligence service has provided evidence of surveillance operations against the African Union headquarters, against regional economic organizations that sought to reduce dependence on French currency and French trade preferences, and against intellectual and cultural movements that promoted African unity and self-determination. The evidence shows French intelligence officers recruiting sources within Pan-African organizations to report on internal deliberations and to identify leaders who were most effective in building support for reduced French presence, conducting influence operations to promote division and competition among African nations rather than cooperation and solidarity, and working to ensure that Pan-African institutions remained weak and ineffective rather than developing into genuine vehicles for collective African power. The Senegalese documentation reveals how French intelligence specifically targeted the intellectual foundations of Pan-Africanism, surveilling universities and research institutions, identifying professors and students who advocated for African unity, and working to discredit Pan-African ideology through media operations and academic publications that portrayed African nationalism as naive, dangerous, or impractical. French intelligence funded academic research that emphasized ethnic divisions and historical conflicts among African peoples while suppressing scholarship that documented African achievements and capabilities. French cultural institutions promoted Francophone identity as superior to broader African identity, creating divisions between French-speaking and English-speaking Africans that prevented unified responses to neo-colonial exploitation. French media operations amplified negative stories about African countries that pursued independent policies while presenting countries that maintained close French ties as models of stability and development, shaping international perceptions in ways that made African independence appear dangerous and French partnership appear essential. Together, these revelations create an undeniable picture of systematic intelligence operations designed to maintain neo-colonial control across Francophone Africa through a comprehensive strategy that combined military presence, economic exploitation, political manipulation, and cultural domination. The evidence shows that French intelligence operations were not isolated incidents or rogue operations, but were coordinated at the highest levels of French government as deliberate policy to maintain French influence and French access to African resources despite the formal end of colonial rule. The operations were sustained over decades with consistent objectives and methodologies, demonstrating institutional commitment rather than individual initiative. The operations targeted every aspect of African sovereignty, from military security to economic policy to political processes to cultural identity, showing a totalizing approach to control that belies French rhetoric about partnership and cooperation. The collective presentation of this evidence by multiple African nations simultaneously has created a political impact that no single nation could have achieved alone. It has become impossible for French government officials to dismiss the revelations as fabrications by a single hostile regime or as misunderstandings of normal diplomatic and intelligence activities. The corroboration across multiple countries, the consistency of operational methods and strategic objectives, and the documentary evidence from French sources themselves have created a case that demands international attention and response. African nations that were previously hesitant to confront French neocolonialism directly have found courage in collective action, with governments across the continent now reviewing their own relationships with France and investigating whether similar intelligence operations have been conducted against them. International media outlets that typically ignore African perspectives or that reflexively defend Western governments have been forced to cover the revelations seriously because the evidence is too substantial and too well documented to ignore. The implications extend beyond Africa to call into question the entire framework of post-colonial international relations. If France, a major European democracy and permanent member of the UN Security Council, has been conducting these operations systematically, what does that say about the nature of sovereignty in the post-colonial world? If intelligence services of former colonial powers have maintained networks designed to manipulate the internal politics of nominally independent nations, how can we understand the history of post-colonial development and the persistent inequalities between former colonies and former metropoles? If the murder of progressive leaders like Sankara was facilitated by foreign intelligence services, how many other assassinations, coups, and destabilization campaigns were similarly orchestrated? These questions have profound implications for international law, for transitional justice, for reparations debates, and for the fundamental legitimacy of the current global order. Musa will spend the rest of his life in secure detention, never to be released but also never to be executed, kept alive as a source of ongoing intelligence and as insurance against any French attempts to deny or minimize what has been exposed. He understands his situation and has accepted it with a resignation that suggests he knew from the beginning that his espionage would eventually lead either to this or to something worse. He cooperates fully now, providing additional details as we continue to analyze the intelligence he has given us, helping us understand the implications of specific operations and the connections between different elements of the French intelligence infrastructure. He has become, in effect, a living archive of neo-colonial espionage, a resource that we will continue to exploit as we work to ensure that such networks can never be rebuilt. The victory is not just operational but psychological and political, demonstrating that African nations can successfully conduct sophisticated counterintelligence operations, that we can protect our sovereignty through our own capabilities, rather than depending on foreign security partnerships that inevitably compromise our independence. It shows that the narrative of African incapacity and permanent dependence on external expertise is false, that we can master the complex tradecraft of modern intelligence operations when we have the political will and institutional commitment to do so. It proves that genuine sovereignty is possible when African nations cooperate with each other rather than allowing ourselves to be divided and manipulated by external powers pursuing their own interests at our expense.